become something of a stereotype that anyone involved in entertainment or even content creation has to have an obligatory story to share about a bad airport experience, and I'm now no exception, which actually surprises me because up until very recently, my experience with travel has been overall pretty positive. I would hear people talk about their disastrous experiences with airlines and think that they have to be making this up or at least exaggerating the truth because there's no way these kinds of things happen in real life, right? Well, I'm here to tell you from firsthand experience that no, it really does happen, and it's every bit as terrible as you'd expect. Earlier this spring, my fiance and I took a trip out of the country for a while. There were several connections we were going to have to catch both ways, which, yeah, isn't ideal, but it happens, especially for longer flights. Big deal. One of our connections was a 12-hour layover in Miami, Florida, which at first doesn't sound too terrible on the surface. If you've never seen or been to the Miami airport, this place is massive. I mean, massive, which means lots of bars, restaurants, shopping, and other fun distractions. It's a perfect way to eat up time while you're waiting for your next flight. When everything is open, that is. But our layover was 12 hours overnight, between 10:30 p.m. and around 10:30 a.m., which meant everything was closed. No shopping, no bars, and even the airline lounge was closed, which was really bad because we had planned to buy a couple of one-time passes and use it to get a nap while we were stuck there overnight until we found out they're only open during regular daytime hours, which I feel like that defeats the purpose a bit, but whatever. We were at least lucky enough to grab something to eat when our plane landed that night, jumping into one of those combination convenience store, bookshop, clothing stores about 30 seconds before they closed, and snagging a couple of packaged sandwiches out of the deli cooler. We ate, spent a few hours wandering aimlessly around back and forth down the concourse, and then finally took turns napping on and off until early morning when a coffee shop finally opened and we were able to get some caffeine and breakfast. Also, just a suggestion, if you're ever able to avoid an overnight airport layover while traveling, I recommend doing so. It's even less fun than it sounds. And if that had been the worst thing that had happened during our travel, that would have been just fine. But that was just an appetizer for what was to come, because getting home again was something else. When we first arrived at the airport to return home, there was some kind of mix-up at the airline desk where we got our boarding passes. Our confirmation emails and travel app both had us arriving back in the U.S. via North Carolina, but our boarding passes that we were handed had us arriving through Florida with a completely different connecting flight home. And after a good 15 minutes of checking through their systems, the airline got us the correct passes for our flight to North Carolina. Now, if I could go back in time, I would actually stop myself and tell our past selves, just take the flight to Florida. Why? Because the flight to North Carolina was delayed by 3 hours. Apparently there was some unspecified issue with an engine that they needed to take care of, which, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you need to do. I would rather us get home a little late and in one piece. But a 45-minute delay turned into an hour, into 90 minutes, into 2 hours, into 3, and by that time, everyone on the flight was going to miss their connections back in the States anyway. And that's when the flight was canceled altogether until the next day. Now, the good news was that the airline must have seen this coming because they already had hotel accommodations ready and travel vouchers for everyone on the flight. But unfortunately, the area where we were immediately outside of the airport wasn't exactly tourist-friendly, and so for the sake of safety, our hotel was an hour-and-a-half drive away from the airport. It was a really nice place, though, and they even provided complimentary dinners for everyone when we checked in. The real problem was the next morning when we learned there was still no communication from the airline as to when exactly we were going to be picked up to return to the airport, or even if our flight was really rescheduled for that day. Because some people had received emails from the airline saying the flight was rescheduled for later that night, whereas others had gotten messages saying it wasn't leaving for another full day altogether. Essentially, no one actually had any real idea of what was going on, and we couldn't get a hold of anyone to even answer our questions. We tried calling the airline directly to find out anything, really, and we were told it would be at least 2 hours on hold before anyone would even be available to talk to us. So instead, we got online with our phones and immediately booked a different flight home. Every flight heading direct back to the US for that day was full up, but we did find an open flight on Air Canada with a direct flight back to Toronto. And wouldn't you know it, we live right across the lake. So We booked 2 seats on that plane, made a rental car reservation at the Toronto airport, grabbed our suitcases, and took the first available cab back to the airport. We landed in Toronto somewhere around 10:30 that night, picked up our rental car, and drove almost 5 hours straight back home. It was exhausting, but ultimately worth it. During the drive, my fiance even kept checking updates from our original flight on her phone, and it was, oh man, it was bad. No surprise, the flight was delayed several times, again, and didn't even leave until after 1 a.m. that night. Had we stuck around, we wouldn't have even landed stateside until nearly 5 a.m., to say nothing of trying to catch an unscheduled connecting flight back home. And for those of you wondering, asking yourself the big question, it was American Airlines. Hey, thank you all so much for watching. Please be sure to leave a like, a comment, or subscribe if you enjoyed this. It would help out my channel so much. And also, if you didn't already know, Floof and Feathers has a book out now. It's a published collection of some of my favorite comics from my original webcomic series, available now from Amazon and Barnes & Noble, so be sure to check it out. And if you want to help support what I do even further, you can also find Floof and Feathers on Patreon and Ko-Fi. Ko-Fi, however it's pronounced, you know where it is. And you can always visit my home website for all of my latest comics, news, and other projects. Links to everything are in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you all again next time.